Joining us from ESPN, you see him every Saturday on College Game Day, and my guy, Stanford Steve. What's up, man?
How are you, bud?
I'm good. Where are you?
I'm at home currently and headed to one of I think our first favorite spot when you first got to Eugene. You're right. I think your eyes kind of lit up that I hadn't seen before, and does help. We were there for some monster games and monster nights. It's funny because the first thing I think of for the rest of my life will be on a late night drive home after a game, and you stopped at 7-Eleven, and it was Halloween weekend, and you were in between Chewbacca and Super Mario buying a tin at like 1 a.m. as we had to drive back to Portland. But that's the first thing I think of all the time. But it's you know what happened.
Yeah. Now, look, I think obviously my first SEC experience was Auburn, and that was the 2008 season, and it was pretty cool, and then we did SC, and that was just so weird, in comparison to some other stuff. But LSU is probably the first place I fell in love with. Texas was kind of underwhelming, but I loved all of the different things. But the problem with Oregon is like it became this thing that we kept missing out on.
Yeah.
I think we kept missing out on it in 2008. Like all year 2008, we kept thinking we were going to get a chance to go, and then something would happen. And then, what was fun about game day, even on the radio side, is you would get done with the show on Saturday, and you were kind of like figuring out based on the outcomes, mapping out where you were going to potentially be that next Thursday. And so we ended up making it out there after like a couple months. And if you look at the history for Oregon, at least for us, and people are talking about this being the biggest game they'll ever have at Autzen. I mean, number 5 USC came in that year. Oregon was number 10.
Yeah.
And Oregon absolutely put it on them. I think Barkley was a freshman that year too. Remember, he had said, like, I don't mind when it's loud.
Correct.
And that at that point was so incredibly loud because if you're on the USC sideline, the way the design of the stadium and everything, like there's SEC loud, but I would say pound for pound, 60,000 plus at Autzen, it holds up with kind of everybody. But I don't know. Like when I saw the highlights, when I saw the headlines of people saying this is the biggest game in the history of Eugene, it kind of is. Like I don't think I can put that SC game ahead of it. So how do you see it?
I'm there with you. We talked about it on our call, and Reese was the guy, of course, that brought it up and just had the numbers. First time 2 versus 3 there. It's the monstrosity of Ohio State and what they bring. It's first top 3 matchup and the first time 2 teams in the top 5 have met there. Oregon's, first top 5 matchup on campus. And then you factor in Ohio State. It's monstrous. It's cool because we had it circled. Like this is one that everybody had planned. Like Ohio State's going to be undefeated when they get here. Oregon's going to be undefeated. And everybody else last week, falters. And those 2 guys are standing here. So when I think about the matchup, I think people would agree. I think Oregon would agree. They haven't played up to their liking. And it's been a lot of self-induced mistakes. Missed assignments up front. Gabriel careless with the ball in the red zone. I think it's three picks inside the 11-yard line. You can't do that against this Ohio State team. I don't even know how many opportunities you're going to get down there. It's funny, Herbie and I have been going back and forth all year about whose secondary we think is the best. He's taking Ohio State. I still stand with Notre Dame. I just love the way that group plays. But they're going to be tested. Oregon's guys that, your Tez and the James kid last week really showed out, who was going to be the next Bucky Irving, who was going to be the next receiver. So Oregon has not played up to it, but Lanning will have his guys ready. The depth on the defensive front, I think, is big. And, our guy Tom Engel, I'm stealing his words. He's a monster Ohio State fan. And he's like, I'm watching him. He's like, if Chip's deck of cards is 52 cards, he's used about 3 of them. So you got some stuff coming out this week. I mean, they've been so good. They are getting better and better. So I definitely believe Ohio State has the advantage, but you got to go out and do it. And as we talked about, this place will be on one for sure Saturday night.
Yeah, the Ohio State point by angle is perfect because
Yeah.
I've watched a good chunk of it because they always kind of land in a spot where you're like, all right, I can watch more Ohio State here. And even though the matchups haven't been great, and in theory, Iowa's supposed to be the biggest test at this point, what I'm so impressed with them is they're not even playing that well. And it just one of those five guys gets their hands on the ball. And then there's just this huge play. Like you have to figure out a way to contain it. And hell, they've gotten off to slow starts.
Yeah.
And then you look at the final score part of it. So stats overall can be like really misleading. You look at like Ole Miss defensive stats, and be like, okay, that's a cool stat, but I don't know that that's necessarily who they are, even though I was impressed with them on the bounce back after South Carolina. I think the scariest part of Ohio State is you watch them for 60 minutes and you may not even like 30 of it. And it hasn't even mattered. So I'm definitely leaning Ohio State in this one because I can't imagine this program not being super up for this. And even though Oregon's fixed what we think is the rushing attack, as Jordan James has been great. They're carrying the ball. The average carry now is a lot better after those 2 weeks. They're not giving up sacks like they were in those first 2 weeks. I don't think their offense is as bankable against a great opponent the way I would kind of bank on Ohio State's, even though it just hasn't mattered, man.
Yeah.
Like it just Judkins gets it, okay, done. Smith gets it done, on and on and on. So we'll see. But you think it's like, are you going to be shocked if Oregon wins?
I'll be surprised. I wouldn't be shocked. I would be surprised because that's a tall, like you just said, the idea of what they are for 60 minutes. You got to, on the other side, you got to be better than them, for a longer period of time. And Oregon just hasn't done that against, bad opponents. And the other factor is, while everybody just wants to talk about Ryan Day and having to beat Michigan, they had this thing circled with the get back. None of the guys really matter that played in that, CJ Stroud and all the other guys that played when Eugene went to Ohio State and won. So I just feel like it's a big spot where Ohio State, where people want to talk about how motivated are they? They have the biggest NIL, all this BS. These guys will be jacked to play in this atmosphere for sure. So I expect Ohio State to play well. That's the other factor of Oregon. I'm not picking them.
If you were voting, would you vote Texas won?
I would, because I've seen them in person. And
what stood out? What stood out in person that we don't see?
The complexity of their offense and how on point they were with viewers. When you go back and watch them, Ryan, like you don't realize it in person, but they're rotating offensive linemen, series. They're giving them series, and they have two freshmen that they're rotating in, and you don't even notice it while you're there in person. And then you go back and it's like, whoa, this guy's doing this. But the idea of how good Sark is, top play caller in the sport, in my opinion, but the way he goes about it, and Michigan has NFL guys, studs on their defense, and you couldn't pick them out that day. You couldn't do it in their defense. Talking to guys there, they've really felt more comfortable this year because last year they played off of those two monsters inside at D tackle, and then just, they had to blitz to get pressure. Now they don't. The freshman Collins, I tell you what, he's next level. The kid from UTSA, it was their big pass rusher they got in the portal, hasn't really produced numbers wise, but the way they're better team as a team defense. I think they're second in scoring. Ohio State's one. They're at 7 points a game. But the idea of what they are and their speed, their speed on defense is really, really good. And then in person tackling. I know Michigan's not a dynamic offense, but the idea of just getting guys on the ground. Mullings is tough to get down. So it was, because I saw them, I could easily flip it this week after seeing Ohio State. That's another Oregon. And I have not seen Penn State, but everybody else is there. And I do believe Texas deserves to be one.
So after all the upsets, Steve, you're kind of left here like trying to make sense of it all. In a million years, you never think Bama's going to lose to Vandy. But watching the game, like they beat them. Like it wasn't fluky. It was weird. This defense that I kind of found a way to love. And I didn't love it against USF. No one should have. Wisconsin, I was like, okay, this is starting to remind me of things that I saw. And then the Georgia part of it, then does it mean that we learned something in the second half? They're too good, but this is weird. This is really weird for the aspirations that they would have in Tuscaloosa every year. Do you think it's just an emotional, stupid moment for a group with new leadership after the Georgia win, or something else?
I think it's Vanderbilt, Ryan. I mean, everybody has to talk about Bama because it's number one losing. I get it. But the idea and that game plan that they had, they made Alabama play slow because they didn't know what the hell was going on. And if you go back and watch the tape, they keep using, an inside zone play to see how Bama's defending it, and all that stuff came off of that one play. Then they start getting the cross motion. Then they get the downhill guys.
It was
and then
an exhausting eyes game for a defensive player because
brutal.
You're just waiting to go, am I going to guess wrong again? And Pavia just owns it because it's the same thing that he was running for all those years in New Mexico.
And the way Alabama is, that the Otis kid now, he's not going to play. He didn't play in that game. They don't have a lot of – they're good up front. They don't have a lot of depth. And when I go back and I watch the Georgia Bama game, I'm watching that. Georgia's defense is on the field in the second half, 55 snaps against that. I mean, that thing was as hectic and helter-skelter as you could be. So now you come in, it's Vandy. Okay, what are they? We don't really, they're off a bye week, and the execution of Vanderbilt was just sensational. I hear people say it's not fluky. It's not. They executed enough. I mean, you think about all the times, and Coach Saban talked about how having to do it, time and time again, no matter what, week after week. He never lost that game. Never. He never lost it, and it's a credit to him. And now the fallout is, all right, what happens next? Well, guess what? You got your offensive line wasn't great against Vanderbilt either. Your right tackle probably had his worst game of the year, and now you got those maniacs on the defensive edge for South Carolina coming in. So you got your attention right away, and that's what's interesting now with Bama. You have plenty of opportunities to go. Their personnel I think is fine defensively, but across the board before the season, every single coach I talk to, what are you most worried about your roster? Depth on the defensive line. Every single one, except one guy, and that's the guy that's doing it down in College Station. Elko and that defense. I got to go to practice down there. He's awesome, and that guy could flat out coach. But every Georgia, Bama, LSU, all the top teams, that's their concern, and it shows out. And now you're in it. And what do you do to adapt? We'll see.
What's it like working with Saban?
It's now that it's been over a month, the total level of like everyone around, you could tell their accountability has raised because of the expectations he brings to the table, and what he thinks it should be, whether it's topics on the show, video, his film room stuff. So that's been awesome. When he speaks, no one says a word. Everybody's tuned in. He's nailed almost every off-the-field conversation we've had. When I'm trying to take notes during our meeting and do things, and I find myself week 2, I'm like, put the pen down and just listen. You're going to remember this stuff. All-time stories. Driving from Oakland to Berkeley, you've done that drive. It's not a pleasant 15 miles. And he's in the car and he's just looking around like, dumbfounded. He says, how the fuck do you recruit here?
I said like 13 years ago when I was there. Right.
The first thing he says. But no, it's been great. He got me pretty good last week coming off the top rope with the girlfriend comment. And that was based off a 3-minute conversation at dinner the night before. He's just sitting there and he's looking around. We're staying at Cal's hotel, and he's getting bombarded obviously with the selfies, and so he takes a chair inside the restaurant. And I'm standing there at the bar, and we're BSing. He's like, "You ever come over here and hang out with this stuff when you were at Stanford?" I'm like, "I actually did." I said, "My girlfriend, went here," and then he takes that and spins it in that heat of a moment when I try and have my moment with the Cal crowd. It was awesome. It's awesome. He's been great. And like I said, we went to his house when we were at Bama Friday night, and him just sitting at the table telling stories. It was awesome. And it's just about how, because he's been in so many scenarios, Ryan, and not being afraid. Like there's no more governor. You talk about it all the time. When we got coaches at ESPN, it was like, I don't really want to have him on. He's not going to say anything, right? Like,
yeah.
He's not coming back, and everything's out of the bag. So the way he's thought out and lived things, it's amazing just how smart everything is. And it's helped me a ton, like just watching tape and just being able to, pick what, people are asking, he's calling, oh man, what did he call it? The relief syndrome. That's what he's calling Alabama. That's his saying. That's a saying he had to his team after a game like the Georgia win. And so we'll get into that this week. His film rooms are awesome. I got a chance to go to A&M and go to practice when I was there. And Elko comes over and we're BSing, how's Nick, this and that. I said, he's fired up. He wants to draw up your third down defense and how you disguise it. He's like, man, he's had a guy reach out to me from his staff every single year going back to when we beat him when I was at A&M. And I said, well, now he doesn't have any excuses. He's doing what he wants. Like, that's phenomenal. So, the stories are just legendary.
Let's run through some of the other teams here, and I'll just kind of like throw it your way. Yeah. Penn State's been they're fourth in the AP, and I know you listen to the podcast, so I don't have to worry about it as much as others kind of understand.
Yeah, your
Penn State position.
Your Bama love is strong.
My Penn State position is not really even about Penn State. I
heard it.
It's
great.
Just at the end of the year, let's see. And Drew Aller's stats are significantly better. He looks better. The touchdown interception split last year I actually thought was alarming, and you saw it in his play. It looks great on paper when you watch him play. So, let's see what 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8 look like against Ohio State, and that's all that's going to matter. But there's a handful, 5, 6 guys on that Penn State team because they always play early. It's always on. I'm like, okay, this all looks better. But yeah, I still don't think they're better than some of these other teams. It could be wrong. It could be the Ohio State benefit of the doubt. How do you see him?
I think what Kotelnicki has done, the offensive coordinator, has been monstrous for them. Because you've watched them, they bring in the tight end, Warren, and they run like this wildcat package. That's just another thing a team has to, prepare for. And so what that does is it takes time away from, it makes the team prepare for more options. Whereas now it's like, hey, we got that on tape. They got to worry about this. Let's get back to doing stuff in other circumstances. And I think you've seen that in the past game. It wasn't as creative in years past. And I was on the field for the Ohio State game last year. First third down, he gets rocked out of a disguised blitz, and he was done the rest of the day, holding on to the ball. And even worse in situations where he needed to, he gets rid of it. But he's grown up a lot, and I think that offense has helped him. There's so much side to side. We talked about it with Vanderbilt. The eye candy that these good offensive coordinators give you now, man, I have to play defense because it just screws with all your keys. And then, say you're on the road and you're not communicating, or you getting the final call after what it should be because they motioned 2 guys instead of 1, and who came across the formation. So I believe they are better. That's the one thing I go back to. I try and keep in mind who's better than they were last year. Just because you have a feeling in a basis for teams. I expect them to go out to SC and really play well. I think they can manhandle SC's offensive line, and that's the first step. That'll be a good stage for them. It's not great. I think it's 1 in 8 Big Ten teams when they've had to travel more than 2 time zones. So the only one that won is Indiana at UCLA. We know what those 2 teams are. But I expect a big day from Penn State. I do believe they'll be in the Big Ten title game.
Yeah, I was looking at, Saturday's reaction for a bunch of different reasons because it was just so remarkable to have the 5 teams in the top 11 lose, and then it could have been 6 for the Miami. Did you stay for the entire Miami Cal thing, or did you get out of there?
No, I got out of there. I had to go to Kansas City, so.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, yeah, for Monday night stuff. So there's no way you're going to be able to spend the entire day there. Mm-hmm. So I'm watching Cam Ward, who I think going into that week he and Milroe were the Heisman favorites. And Cam is probably one of the only quarterbacks that can bring his team back and do that. And I love their receiver group and the whole deal.
Yep.
But he also, he's, for a guy that's really good, his willingness to risk the possession is beyond everybody else. And I don't know when he's going to grow out of that. Maybe never. Mm-hmm. But then it turned into like a bigger conversation of like, okay, well, we're seeing all these teams lose because of the NIL and the transfer portal and all these different stuff. And like, I'm just like, look, we gotta see it happen a couple of years before I'm ready to start expecting like NC State to win the ACC, just because everything's more level now. Because I'm not there with it. But when I look at like, Clemson took all that shit because of not taking in any transfer portal people and Dabo and the whole deal after they get stomped by Georgia. Mm-hmm. And they've righted the ship, so now they don't have to hear it all. But by the way, like the transfer portal thing with Clemson, what's so silly is if you have an established brand that's like a recent established brand, the idea that you wouldn't want to use that as an advantage to bring people into the transfer portal, like forget your coaching 101 stuff. Like you're one of the few destinations, Clemson, that would actually get some higher profile guys because you've had this really great run going back not that long ago, knowing that it's dipped there a little bit. So anyway, fast forward to kind of like the Georgia part of it. Like I'm just taking in all the quarterbacks that were like at the forefront of this conversation. And I keep coming back to like, what has Carson Beck done to even be in these conversations that he was a part of, whether it was projected to be the number one pick for the 25 draft, where he was in a lot of real mock drafts as the number one overall pick. He was basically tied with everybody else as the Heisman favorite with like 5 other quarterbacks before the season started. I thought his first half against Alabama was disastrous. I thought he was so bad. I think the final numbers actually could have been a little worse. I imagine the film was terrible. And, fine, cool. They righted the ship a little bit against Auburn. But he was thrown in a conversation that I'm starting to realize, like, why was he ever in this conversation in the first place?
It's a great point because he is, when you see these names and, you mentioned the Heismans and, the moments that people have and what people remember from a Saturday. It's Cam Ward, it's Milroe. And then, Carson Beck is there. And when you go back and watch the tape, the Alabama, the screen early where it's just where he's trying to throw the slip screen, just goes in the Bama defenders. The receiver never gets to check. He's checking the play to the receiver. I think it was Arian Smith. He's looking right at him. He never gets it. It was to change it from a slant to a quick screen. He throws a quick screen. Arian Smith runs a slant, and you got a pick, and the place is bananas. It was not great. Communication was a huge issue. He got antsy. You saw that on the grounding call in his own end zone. But to be able to come back, and that's where I'm not out on Georgia. I go back to last year where they go to Auburn, and Auburn plays their best game to date. Peyton Thorne's running the ball. They added that. I believe it's the first game, Hugh took over play calling. But in that atmosphere, and you mentioned how much, we love Auburn, Beck got it done. And he was excellent in that second half of that game. I mean, they're trailing in the fourth quarter, and he was great. Now, he had 2 great pros in Bowers and McConkey. And that's where I think, I talk to guys that go to practice at Georgia. They're like, we have the receivers. We watch them every day, and they do it. And in the first half, the combination of communication, some MAs up front with the offensive line, you don't see it. I mean, Arian Smith made one of the biggest plays in their year 2 years ago when the DB for Ohio State falls and it turns the whole game around. So I think it's just more being comfortable. They were really fired up about ETN getting him from Georgia. He gets to get suspended. The off the field stuff looks like it's hanging a cloud over the team. And I just think it was about getting on the same page. They've had a bunch of guys, mix and match on the offensive line. But I can't wait to see what they look like in Austin next week when we go there. Because that's you had your brutal half. Kirby talked about it. I'm so proud of you guys. You came back against Bama, which is still astounding to me and made me think differently because, like we talked about the Alabama defense, like they got exposed. And then you saw that against Vanderbilt. So what Georgia brings to the table in Austin is going to be a major factor for me in what I think, because they do have to play everybody. You still got this road trip to Austin, Oxford, and then you get Tennessee coming in. So they're 9-3. As long as they beat one of those, is going to be a hell of a lot better than other teams. And that's, with the Big Ten looking the way it is, and now, Miami looking the way that ACC is going to be one big. These non-SEC people are not going to be happy when they see how many SEC teams are going to be back in, even though they all lost last week.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably as soon as these teams lose, like I would have loved to have been sitting there the same way I was Ohio State when they'd gotten smoked by Iowa, and Joel Klatt is aware of every time I bring this up, so his friends will listen and we laugh about it. So we're cool. We get. I think Joel's awesome, but I remember being at home, being like, "How could he be this dismissive of the Iowa loss by Ohio State? Like, what are you talking about?" I wish it were still 4 teams just to hear, like, if Bama were to win the SEC, but with a Vanderbilt loss. And arguing, saying undefeated, whoever knows.
Yeah.
I don't think the other 3 conferences are all going undefeated. So Bama winning the SEC would probably be in. If Vandy actually is a 6-6 team, that would also kind of help their cause too. I guess I was just a little frustrated being like, this thing doesn't even matter. And shoot, they could lose to somebody else. They could lose to LSU, and if they're 10-2 and win this, they're gonna be in the playoffs. So it doesn't even matter. Do you have any read on the Big 12 whatsoever? Because I gave up. a couple weeks ago.
Reese nailed it, as he always does before the season, when he said it's not the deepest league, it's the widest. And you've seen that because you have a team trickle up because they start 3-0 in UCF, and they got manhandled by Colorado.
Yeah.
You see Colorado go play an out-of-conference game in Nebraska, manhandled. Utah plays like crap at home. And Arizona goes there and wins. I'm really fired up to see the Kansas State-Colorado matchup because if Colorado wins that game, they're in it. They are in the mix in this conference. And going back to your SEC thing for a second, what's really going to be interesting is how we judge the teams that lose conference title games. That is going to be a monster factor down the road. But as far as the Big 12, I think I've picked 5 different teams, 5 different weeks to win the league. Iowa State is in a brutal spot this week, going to West Virginia for a night game. You're undefeated. West Virginia has already been humbled a couple times, bad losses. What do you get out of that? That hurts the conference, I think, if West Virginia beats Iowa State, because you don't have that top dog. And you need that going forward as far as the presumption and thoughts that people have on your conference. So good luck trying to figure it out. I still think Utah, if Rising is going to play, is the team.
We're on the same page with that. It really comes down to, because like the K-State part of it, to see them lose a couple, they could have lost the Tulane game.
Yeah.
I've watched them enough to go, how am I supposed to think you can ride this all out? But because it is so wide, it's probably a 2-loss winning team. Texas Tech is actually in first place right now. Nobody's even mentioning them.
No one.
And BYU doesn't get any love on top of everything else. So when you see, I already know what we would do. We'd go neutral field Rising. We're just going to take Utah over everybody, because that's what I thought going into the year and the buy-in to Whittingham. But Keithy hasn't been as much of a factor as I thought he was going to be coming back. And Zach Wilson's brother, they were able to pull out the Oklahoma State game, but then Oklahoma State's already lost 3 times. So
yeah, and then I just thought it was fascinating because you saw Whittingham was built on culture and defense, just toughness. Like what they did in the portal, then when they got all these receivers, I was like, okay, Cam's, and you talk to people, spring game, they're throwing it all over the place. Cam's going to throw for a bunch. It's going to be a different look, because for the first time, I didn't have a running back. It was going to be running back by committee, and we haven't seen it. So do we see it? Hopefully. But I think that would be the measuring stick. It would be Utah with Rising in that conference.
Enjoy Autzen. Say hi to the boys at Taylor's. It won't be Halloween, so it won't be peak Autzen. But you are going to probably one of my 3 favorite campuses in the country. And I can't wait. I cannot wait for this game on Saturday.
The goal is Bama LSU. Hopefully we can get there for the show and rendezvous.
Yeah, I'll be there.
All right.
I'll be there. Not working. So we'll do it. All right. That is Stanford Steve Coughlin. Magna cum laude, Stanford class of business. You'll see him on game day every Saturday with all the guys. Thanks, man. She's an incredible author, and if you like the NBA and you like writing, you will like her. Mirin Fader joins us now. who has a new book coming out next Tuesday. You can pre-order it now, but it is about what I think is perhaps the most underrated player in NBA history. So I was thrilled when I heard about the topic of Hakeem Olajuwon. And of course, the book is Dream. What's up? Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So let's start with that before we get into the book and some of the fun stuff that I learned about Olajuwon through this. Because you and I had talked because you'd done the Giannis book, and I thought, okay, you know what? You were like, well, the next project's Hakeem, and I went, okay, well, I can't wait because I do feel like he gets lost in history a little bit, depending on where you think he ranks and all that kind of stuff. But your motivation for going, okay, this is the person I want to spend this amount of time on understanding this subject. Like, why was it Olajuwon for you?
I just felt like he was criminally underrated. You know, every time somebody would say, who's the best, who's the top, whatever, he's just always left off of these lists. And it's crazy for somebody that was so dominant, still top 10 in steals. Like, I just think it was crazy. And so if you're under 30, you don't really know how amazing Dream was. But for me, you know, when I pick a topic, it's got to have human interest elements. And I just thought his return to Islam and how really he was the first pioneer, the first African superstar. He very much set the table for Giannis and Joel Embiid. So he was almost my window into this current generation of superstars.
Yeah, I love the answer about Giannis and Embiid, and I'll probably get to that a little bit there. But let's go to his origin story, because you knew, look, I'm trying to go back to like my first Hakeem Olajuwon awareness moment. It's probably the NC State game, but I still was so young that I didn't really understand his backstory. But when you read it play out in the book and you're kind of going like, okay, well, how many years is this from when he first touched a basketball? Like, that part of it's absurd. So let's kind of start with that timeline of him learning about this game and then ending up in college. And then I feel like it feels like 10 years should have gone by, but that's not the case at all. Right.
It's barely a year. And he is not a quote dream when he starts. In the words of one of his teammates, he couldn't dribble. He couldn't do anything. And he didn't even want to play basketball. So imagine being 17 years old and you're like the tallest person in your neighborhood. You're damn near 7 feet tall. And everyone's like, Hakeem, you got to play basketball. You got to play basketball. And he's like, I have no interest in basketball. He wanted to play handball, which if you all are having flashbacks to PE, this was actually very competitive. It was a hard game. And he also did football. And so he always wanted to do everything else. And his coaches, his basketball coaches, had to literally stalk him to say, yes, I will come to a first practice. So even when he joins basketball, like at age 17, he's still playing handball. He still has to be transported on the back of a car to his handball and basketball tournaments, sometimes leaving mid-game to make the other. So this was not the story of a person primed to play basketball, a person determined to play basketball. It was honestly an accident that he turned into this amazing basketball player.
So when I'm reading about all the stuff from Africa, like, it feels like it's going really fast, but is it the competition? Like, everybody realizes like, okay, this guy could be really, really special, but
right.
This there's no background for it. So I'm wondering, like, he wins MVP of some tournament very early on in the book, but what kind of level of basketball are we talking about?
So at the time, Nigeria was not a competitive basketball place. The other countries in Africa, primarily those that were formerly under, French colonization, they were way more advanced. And so basketball didn't even really get going in Nigeria till the 1960s. And so he was playing against people that were not necessarily the best competition, but they were very physical. Like, his teammates were in the Nigerian army. So it was it was tough in the physical sense, but in the skill sense, not really. So he could dominate, but he didn't even really know how to do a drop step or anything like that. So the competition, while it was really seen as prestigious, honestly, to our standards, it really wasn't. And so his first taste of like actual competition is 1980, only about a couple months after starting to pick up a ball. He is playing in his first international tournament in Morocco, and coach like barely plays him. It's really, really tough for him. He's riding the bench. He's seeing the older guys get out. But it's his first taste of like, okay, there are really good basketball players out there outside of where I live. And so for him, I don't think people truly understand, for him to then somehow play in college in America less than a year later, make the team, somehow become a starter a year after that is crazy. It's actually crazy.
It really is. And you loosely know, you're like, oh, what an incredible story. And you go, no. Like, and that's what I love about the beginning of the book, because it really puts the timeline in. I kept thinking, okay, well, how much further along are we? And we're like, no, this is from when he started playing for this club team. And then everybody's trying to grab him. And then they want him to stay there. And it feels like he is a pioneer. I mean, he's a pioneer for a bunch of different reasons, but he connects with one guy that apparently is going to figure out a way to place him in the States. I'd always heard the St. John's story and I never knew that it was true. I grew up a St. John's fan. So you'd always heard like, oh, actually Olajuwon was supposed to come here. I mean, I've heard those stories about so many different players, players. What is actually true about like what could have happened, why it was Houston? Because it sounds like he just gets off a plane and then that's it, which seems super unorganized.
Okay, so this is why the book is called Dream. His nickname is Dream. Everything is posited as a dream, a myth, a fantasy. Too good to be true, right? Because it is. So the one story that you're alluding to that people think they know is allegedly this white American coach named Chris Pond happened to be coaching in Africa. He was coaching the Central African Republic team. They played against Olajuwon's Nigeria team. And so that's how we first saw Olajuwon. And this is just a random American coach. He's from North Carolina. His brother played for NC State. At the time, there wasn't really this international recruiters that we have now. But Chris Pond was almost like one of those early guys, the first one that really wanted to be seen as this like all-world recruiter. And he tells Olajuwon, hey, I think you could play in America. And so the fairy tale is they meet. The next day, they're at the embassy. Somehow he gets Olajuwon papers. And then he says, you're going to go to St. John's first. They're expecting you. I'll see you over there, fly to New York. And then a couple of days later, we're going to visit Houston and we have a tour of other schools. He lists a couple other schools. And everyone says that the funniest part of the story is that he gets to JFK. It's so cold. He feels a chill down his back. He's like, no, I can't go to St. John's. I got to go to a warmer climate. So I'm just going to go along to Houston a couple days early. Lands in Houston, match made in heaven. They go to the Final Four. Phi Slamma Jamma. Yay, everything is great. The problem is it's not true. I did a FOIA request to look deep into Chris Pond, and the papers at the time suggested that he worked for the State Department. Turns out he never worked for the State Department. He could have been a freelancer, what they would call like a contractor, but he was not a, quote, State Department official, which is what a lot of people said at the time. And I talked to the St. John's coaches. They said they never recruited him. There was never a visit in place. Obviously, emails were not a thing at the time, but there was no phone calls. There was no visit in place. So whether Chris Pond wanted to embellish himself as this all-world recruiter and, make it seem like he had all these destinations for Olajuwon to go to, can't tell. Chris Pond has passed. I talked to his only surviving sibling. She said he tended to embellish. So essentially what you have is the St. John's myth story just isn't true. And he actually was supposed to go to Houston all along. I don't know what Chris Pond expected. If he did go to St. John's, would he just knock on the door and they'd be like, who are you? So wouldn't that have been funny? I don't know if that would have happened. But yeah, it wasn't this fairy tale that people think it is. It's a nice story and people liked it because it went with this sort of mythological, ooh, look at this player from Africa. But it wasn't true.
Once he gets to Houston, the other part that I love is, I would say, the other underrated guy that I defend quite a bit. Although, look, I can't keep my top 20 list updated every single day. Is Moses Malone. I really wonder what the Hakeem story is if it isn't for Moses playing with him in all these pickup games while he's at Houston. Because in the beginning, it seems like, okay, physically we get it, but this guy is not a Division I basketball player. Like, he does not have the skill. And Moses, instead of just being dismissive, which I'm sure a lot of American players are like, what are you doing? Don't even waste your time. Moses immediately, because of the Houston connection, it seems like he's like, I'm going to invest all of this time into you, which I just loved hearing.
I know. It really speaks to this idea that, like, generationally, basketball is a brotherhood. And Moses did not have to invest in him the way that he did. But every single day, He would play with him all day, one-on-one. And it isn't even a sense of like taking him to the side and like teaching him a lesson or sharing wisdom. It's just when you have somebody like Moses Malone digging in your back, the elbow is there. You have to find a way to score on him. You have somebody like Moses who is talking trash and, Moses was intimidating. People don't know. Like, he was such an amazing rebounder, like relentless. Just the guy was a hell of a competitor. That is the best education you could ever have for a young guy like Olajuwon. But the other thing that people spoke to was that Moses was a giver. So he would give him hand-me-down clothes. He would pay for his meals. There's so much stuff that Moses did behind the scenes for Hakeem that people don't realize. And you know what? I think it was because of Moses's deep mentorship of him that Hakeem so internalized that lesson of always helping who comes next. I don't think it's a surprise that Hakeem would mentor LeBron, Kobe, Giannis, all these people that came to him. And I think it's because he saw the way the older generation, people like Moses, invested in him.
So things start getting better, and then it turns into, what is this guy? 3 Final Fours, the disappointing national championship loss, to being the number 1 pick. And at that point, people can revisit it all, but I'm glad the way that you talked about it. And you interview so many people for this book that, and it's really easy to play the results after the fact. But 40 years ago, nobody thought Michael Jordan should have gone ahead of this guy, even though he's still a project. And this is still, I think, years before the NBA is like an upside draft.
Yeah. Have you ever heard anyone say the Rockets should have drafted Jordan? Like, to this day, I just love that.
No one's serious. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like the respect. I mean, you will see the article, what if this had happened? But the respect that people have for Hakeem is that to this day, they are happy that they selected him. That is incredible. And Jordan himself could not have been more complimentary about Hakeem at the time and now. It was so interesting talking back with Rod Thorne and Mike Tebow, people who were intimately involved in the Bulls' decision-making. They're like, no question, if we had the number 1 pick, we would have gone with Olajuwon. It's hard to remember because that era was so different. Like, you could not, this idea that you could win with a guard, it just wasn't a conception. You had to get a center. You had to get a post. And even though Olajuwon didn't necessarily have the offensive capabilities that he'd have, right? He was not the Dream Shake, persona that he developed. He just was a really good defensive player and shot blocker. And that was enough to make him unanimous number 1.
Yeah, but it's also like you're going through the game logs, and I remember that 86 Lakers series because I remember the Ralph Sampson shot, and I remember the Celtics being like, we're not playing the Lakers. Like,
right.
how did this happen? And it's something that, I think about a lot with the story arc of like a character in a movie or a TV show. Well, the story arc of the NBA player, and I talked to John Butchergross about this week, was that, Anthony Edwards right now, his approval rating's the highest it's ever been. Giannis had this super high approval rating, and then he wins, and it's like, man, like I can make an argument that I think Giannis's ring is like the most important ring for any of the so-called stars, because the stuff that he would be dealing with if he doesn't have that ring, if Chris Paul stays healthy, that's just me making my Chris Paul statement. Like Anthony Edwards is probably going to be on the downside. Like, I try to remind these people of this all the time. Like, at some point, Wembanyama, people are going to start asking questions about him on TV shows. Okay. It just is going to happen. Hakeem went through a really weird timeline in that it's all so impossibly ahead of schedule. And then they get through the Lakers, and then there's this void. And this takes like almost another decade. What was it like kind of trying to figure out what that was so many years removed of like how he felt about his place, going back, revisiting the criticism, where the approval rating was, and then ultimately like him almost leaving Houston before they were able to win some championships?
Yeah, I don't think people realize that it was one player away from him going to the Clippers. Like, it was from the top to the bottom. Like, he was like,
about a year before the title?
About two years, two seasons. Yeah. So right up before that. And it was so sad because, like, the series that you alluded to in 86, they're playing the Celtics. Hakeem is looking like the second coming. He is going at Robert Parrish, who is like an amazing interview for the book. And Parrish, the first game, Hakeem just walks up to him and is like, "What's up, Big Chief?" Like, you're just walking up to Parrish, like, "What's up, Big Chief?" You know, like, he just was not afraid at all. He did not care about the floor, the weird things that the Celtics would do. Like, he just didn't care. And the Celtics respected that about him. And it looked like they were going to be this dynasty. And then it just like all fell apart. There were drug issues. There were people, just really weren't. Honestly, he did not have a good team around him. And it was very hard for him because he felt like, I'm in my prime. I need to win a championship. The critics are saying that, will my career feel incomplete if I don't win a title? I'm not so young anymore, and I'm not getting better players. I pass out of the double team and they miss the shot. What do you want me to do? And so it was this really dark year. And people forget Hakeem himself had a temper. He would get ejected from games. He was not the peaceful man that we all know today. So it was a very tumultuous time. And he was like, I'm done with this. The owner basically accused him of faking an injury. And he was like, that's it. Like, you're not going to question my integrity. I'm a competitor. I'm happy to play on the Clippers. And Sterling really loved him, really wanted him. And it was almost a done deal. And it just one player, it didn't go through. So Hakeem has to stay in this franchise that openly criticized him, that openly said he was faking an injury. And he's got to make it work. But a lot of things had to go right. He had to get Rudy Tomjanovich becoming the head coach. They had to actually trade for really good players. And he had to learn that it's okay to pass out the double team and trust your teammate, and they can knock down the shot. So that's why I think the first title was so miraculous, because it seemed impossible. Like, I genuinely never thought they would win a title, and nobody else did either.
Yeah, to go from being that close to being out, the contract part of it that you go over, and I remember this stuff, but I don't remember it with the detail, certainly. So you going through all of that, and you're thinking, if the Clippers had just been a little bit more forceful, it sounds like their deal was waiting to be done, because that deal is compared to other potential rumors where it feels like your sources are kind of dismissive. Well, I don't know that there was anything there. It sounds like if the Clippers had just called back and said, okay, we're going to do, I don't know if it was a price thing, but it sounded like there was a deal to be made there. And considering it's the Clippers, then he doesn't have 2 rings. He doesn't have 2 rings with the Clippers. There's no way.
Right. And you think the Toronto final year was sad. Can you imagine if Hakeem would have went to the Clippers and the way that career would have, I just can't even see it.
No, I hate the imaginary version of this. I mean, we can go over like the rest of the Houston roster, and what's so impressive about that first title team against the Knicks is like there's some really nice role players there, but this is not some stacked team the way we're looking. We had a run, I would say, through the teens where it's like, tell me who your third Hall of Famer is before I take you seriously. And I like how they went kind of 1 in, 4 out with Tomjanovich, but Sam Cassell's hitting shots. Ellie's this young guy, like. That's not one of the all-time great teams, and he's at the center of it. And of course, they smash a really young Magic team the next year. The other thing, I'm just going to go with it because I'm sort of meandering through the topic of Olajuwon because I'm excited about it. I hated whenever Jordan fans would be like, well, the only reason the team got to 2 is because Jordan would have won 8 straight. And when I was younger, I'd be like, yeah, I don't know, maybe. I mean, it's hard to ever argue against any Jordan hypothetical. But when you watch The Last Dance and how emotionally exhausted all of those guys were going in for the second three-peat, there's no way they were going to win 8 straight. It was just, so somebody was going to get one, and maybe it would have been an Hakeem in a different year. Maybe if it's not 94, then maybe it is in 95 or something like that, because those guys were exhausted on the third part of part 2 in that movie. I don't think you would have been able to maintain that kind of focus and competitiveness for 8 straight seasons. I think that's a massive, massive assumption, even when it comes to somebody like Michael Jordan.
I agree. And I think all of your Houston listeners are giving you a round of applause right now, because they are so used to because they are so used to that argument. And you know what? This is what I hate about sports media. Like, we're so quick to discredit. Like, why can't we appreciate Hakeem and what he did? Why is it always a qualifier? Oh, if Jordan would, and I think that is really like how his career is talked about. it's always an asterisk. And I don't understand. I understand why, but I think it diminishes how good he was for the very reason that you just talked about. He was not playing with all-stars. They were just really scrappy and determined. I think that says more about Hakeem as a leader and his
It
skill set.
does. It does.
You know?
We totally agree on that. Like when you start going through some rosters of like who won titles the last 20 plus years, like that is not some great team. It just isn't. It's just how special he was. And maybe it's because whenever there was like the David Robinson Hakeem debate, even back then, I'd be like, I don't even want to hear it. Like go outside with that one. Are you kidding me? Because I also thought when I watched them up against each other, I was like, there's a guy that's another level than the other guy. But before this first title, before them finding a way, I don't even know. I think they were just sort of forced to continue to be in a relationship because there wasn't another option. But you do spend some of the book talking about his return to his faith, and it feels like it happens kind of out of nowhere, and yet it completely dominates his path and how he's going to carry his life out. And I was wondering, do you think he gets the rings without it? Because I'm probably so cynical that I'm like, yeah, I don't know. He's awesome. He's probably still got a title somewhere in the mid-90s for him. But there's an argument certainly to be made that I think you present that he becomes so more well-rounded or so more focused with the stuff away from basketball that maybe that makes him a better basketball player.
I tend to think that, and especially from just talking with everyone that was pretty much around him that had been with him pre, returning to Islam and then after, the difference, it was like a different person. And so I personally don't think that, he would have won those titles. And honestly, from a purely basketball standpoint, part of that is because he could literally stay in the game. He was getting so many ejections prior to his return to Islam. He just had this temper, and he himself said, I have a really quick temper. Robert Reed, former teammate, was like, Dream was hell. And it wasn't that he would purposefully go after people. It's that they would go after him because they couldn't stop him. Like one of my favorites was Michael Cage being like, yes, I purposefully got into fights with Dream because I could not stop him. And so you take all of this sort of the fighting and the ejections and all of these things, the Rockets were terrible during those years. So when he starts to have more, a calm about him and a focus outside of basketball and a discipline, those become so less frequent. And that's when he's really able to also connect with teammates. Like Kenny Smith, great interview for the book. He was like, people didn't talk to Dream. Like we didn't talk to him. Like he was hard to play with. And you saw Dream really begin to open up to his teammates, become friends with them. And so the camaraderie that team had, I just don't think he would have had that team chemistry had he not had this, major epiphany and transformation.
Yeah, you did a great job with that because you're sitting there, you're rooting for Olajuwon throughout the entire book, even though you know the ending. Because if you bought the book, you like him enough. I was excited about it, but then there's these moments like, did I not realize that he was actually a really difficult teammate, or he was so challenging? But it didn't feel the same way as other challenging teammates, where I think a lot of it could be driven by selfishness. With him, right. I just think it was this standard that he had for himself.
Yes.
That he wanted others to have. I mean, sure, it sounds like there are plenty of times where he was frustrated with other people around him not making shots, but then we can start just going back to some of the roster construction stuff that we touched on here a bit.
Him?
Yeah, but I think when I got done with the book, I'm like, I knew he was just a really special player and all this stuff, but to think about how fast he went from I don't want to play this sport to number one pick to two-time NBA champion, it's not supposed to happen. It's not supposed to happen this way. It'd be one thing to come into the league like role player, defensive five. Maybe we bench him at the end of the game, or maybe we play him. Like, no, at some point he's going to be the best player in the league, and that's again, I think, kind of to the point that you made about the title of the book. It's why it's very fitting, on top of his nickname.
Right. Yeah, and the other thing is that he doesn't get better by himself. I think this book, I really wanted to give flowers to all the people that made him into what he is. Carroll Dawson just passed away, former GM of the Rockets. Incredible big man coach. He's the one that mentored him. Moses Malone. this Nigerian player, Yomi Sangodeyi, which I discovered the Dream Shake really comes from him. It's just a community. Rudy Tomjanovich, people made him into what he is. And that's why I think that this generation loves him so much, because they realize so many people helped him and he helps others. And you never hear about it. The only reason people know he worked out with Giannis is because clips surfaced on the internet, which Hakeem is not on social media advertising this. He gives because he cares about the game and giving back to the game, not because he wants a photo shoot like a lot of these other retired players do.
I don't have a question here. It's just an observation, because I like that you started the introduction with this, because it has driven me crazy for years, because I actually think it's insulting that we'll watch a player have trouble with his post. Now we don't even care because nobody plays in post, but there was that LeBron moment where, like, he needs to go down to the Hakeem camp for like a week. And it's like, so you expect, and as great as LeBron is, as great as these NBA athletes are, you expect you can spend like 3 to 4 days with Hakeem at his little barn down there and do 2 days, and you're gonna come back. Like, do you know how incredibly dismissive that is to the skill that Hakeem developed in a way that we had never seen somebody with that body type? That you're just, again, an NBA player, we're going to learn a couple foot placement things,
right,
and then you're going to just come out like this awesome post player. Like, no. We were talking thousands and thousands of hours, but it just was recycled all of the time. And then when the intro started there, I just kind of started chuckling, because I was like, I'm glad I get to ask her about this absurd premise that you're just going to hang out with him for 3 days and leave like, Kevin McHale or something. So, anyway.
Look, it's like when your mom gives you a recipe and she tells you exactly what to do and exactly how to turn on this and that and do this and that, and then it just is like never as good. Yeah, that's Hakeem.
There you go.
That's a secret sauce.
Again, dream the life and legacy of Hakeem Olajuwon. It is out Tuesday from Mirin Fader. You can pre-order right now. Great work on this, and thanks for the time.
Thank you so much.
The Alliance. Let's recap it. What did we do last week, Ceruti?
2-2. You and I lost. Kyle and Oregon won. So, yeah. Kyle's leading the way. Actually, Kyle and Oregon leading the way at 4-2. Ryan, you're 3-3. I'm 2-4. So not great for me, but we'll bounce back.
Okay. I expect you to bounce back. So the board, who wants to go first on this one? Do we all have separate? Because sometimes we may all want to do the same game, but then I think we're all down to a bunch of. All right. So go.
Let me just start, because I'm last. Yeah. So I'll just go. I'll just get mine out of the way here. I'm going to go South Carolina, Alabama over 46.5. Bama off a loss. They might just want to beat the crap out of somebody at home this week. Last time Bama didn't score 40 points too, by the way, was last week against Vandy. They scored 35. So I think they're going to be in the 30s in this game, I think. South Carolina struggled, I know, last week against Ole Miss, but I think they could score. Bama struggles with running quarterbacks. So I like both teams to score. Bama probably wins comfortably, but I think there will be a lot of points in this game.
Okay.
All right. Well, I really wish I could take the Pats in this, but this is college football, so I'm going to keep the good vibes going. And I was thinking around this time last year, we were in Oxford. That was a great time. Van popped up, so I'm just gonna. I'm taking Ole Miss. Early. I'm taking Ole Miss minus 160, which will keep the odds gods as well as Ceruti happy. I think we'll be hitting our spot. So I'm just taking Ole Miss money line versus LSU.
Okay.
I can jump in. I'm taking Minnesota outright against UCLA. Heading out west, Minnesota beat USC last week. Close game against Michigan the week before that. The odds they're going crazy. They was like minus 200 earlier. Last night it was like minus 180. So I'm not sure what's quite happening. But I like Minnesota to pull it out.
Okay, yeah, row the boat. Hadn't heard that in a while. They're rowing the boat this week, and then we heard about some sort of like brain inducement soda that was going on out there. So love it. Keep it going. Gophers football. All right, so what's available? What are we at right now? Because did no one do alt spread on anything, Ceruti?
No, we all. I feel like I did the alt total. They took money lines of favorites. So the world's your oyster. There's a lot of games here. Did you want to do, or you do?
I know, but I didn't want
Ohio State, Oregon.
Want to be able to be the guy that got the alt spread favorable here on this one.
No, you're not. You take whatever you want. Take whatever. We're in a good shape.
Okay. All right. So what can I do with Ohio State? It's minus 3.5 right now at Odson, correct?
Who do you want?
I want Ohio State.
Ohio State to win?
Yeah. So what are we at? If I
that's
go
minus 160.
Okay.
So if we put that in, that's actually almost plus 500. So this is our biggest pod of the season, boys.
Oh, wow.
Just saying.
Okay. Back up the trucks. Call your accountant. This one feels great. That is this week's Alliance on FanDuel. Check out the latest odds, FanDuel.sportsbook.com.
You want details? Fine. I drive a Ferrari 355 Cabriolet. What's up? I have a ridiculous house in the South Fork. I have every toy you can possibly imagine. And best of all, kids, I am liquid. So, now you know what's possible. Let me tell you what's required.
Life advice, the email address. Send them on in, gang. Lifeadvice, rr@gmail.com. We've got Kyle. We've got Steve. Let's get right to it. This one, dry run. Didn't even read it. Feels like it's an observation more, but let's go for it. It's late. 5'10", 160. My basketball comp is Klay Thompson if he started playing pickup at 34. I like that. Can you guys see that? Can you vision it? No? Okay.
It was there, I think, but
keep
I don't know.
keep reading. Tonight, a realtor came to my door at dinner time and said, "Hello, Mr. Smith," which is not my name, but that's really what he said. Oh, Jesus, that's even worse. "Are you looking to sell your house in the next year?" As my dog barked like a banshee, my 2-year-old threw food around the kitchen. I said, "Probably not." He wished me a happy holidays. It's October 8th. And see you next year, as I shut the door. Has anyone ever been like, "Yes, actually, I'm so glad you stopped by. What's my house worth?" Anyway, he left. I realized that I really hate people coming to my door. This includes even friendly neighbors who are dropping off fruit, but mostly realtors and solar panel salesmen. As an aside, my wife, who is a solar energy researcher, cordially engages with them, listens to their BS, and then happily mocks them after closing the door. Man, solar panel guys listen to the pod. The last couple of weeks are just like, take it easy, dudes.
Just as an aside, I had a solar guy come over a couple weeks ago.
You looking into it?
I had it on the old house and might on this house. Listen, they're giving it away for free in Connecticut, so I might as well do it. But I had a guy that came. It's literally nothing out of pocket. So what's up? But that's not the story. The story is the guy that came over to try to sell me on this. He was telling me the story of like on one of the canvassing things, he got like attacked, but mauled by a dog, and like bit his arm. I was like, damn, like I didn't know what to say to that. I'm like, all right, sorry, dude. Like that's a bummer. But he was telling me kind of his life story about how that happened, and I was like, I don't know if this is making me more or less likely.
That would
I don't
really
know if
help.
this is going to make me more or less likely to choose you, but like you have me thinking. I got to be honest.
I guess I just remember this girl I was dating who was a little down on her luck. Maybe that's why she's dating me. And she was to a point where she was inquiring about solar panel. And I was like, you are going to regret this big time. And she went in and interviewed, and the guys were like, just hire her. And she was like, I don't think I want to do it. They were giving off kind of creepy vibes. I was like, you do? You think they were giving off creepy vibes a little bit down at the old solar panel trailer?
The trailer.
She's like, they said I'm hired. I was like, what do they pay? I was like, what the fuck? I was like, it's not. And then once she kind of came to her senses, she's like, I'm not passionate about solar panels. I'm not passionate about the workforce. And they gave up super creepy vibes. And it sounded like they just wanted an attractive girl to be around the trailer all the time.
Close proximity.
They wouldn't stop calling her. They wouldn't. No, they were like, hey, yeah, right. About solar paneling. Yeah, right. Yeah. Are you sure you don't want to work in this? So anyway, hey, let me just say this to clear all things up. To the real solar panel people out there, you're doing good stuff.
You're the real heroes.
Right. Yeah. All right. So I just don't want to be bothered at home. So I guess my question is, shouldn't we be in a post-door knocking society? Is it unreasonable for me to expect to be left alone at my house? How do you deal with unwelcome solicitors at your door? My gut instinct is usually just not to answer, but given the aforementioned commotion inside my house, this always feels really awkward. Thanks for life advice. All right. Yeah. I guess
they got signs for this, man. I know it doesn't look great on the front of your house, but they've got signs for this.
Can't do that.
You can't do that. Yeah.
Can't put a sign up. No solicitors. People are going to think you're in there.
It's like Halloween. You have a "Don't come over" sign on your front door.
What are you doing? You get your shortwave radio set up in the basement? Fucking weirdo. I don't think you can put a sign.
What about a clever doormat? What about a doormat that basically says that, but it's not posted?
Go away.
Yeah. Not go away, because that's always a joke. You're like, oh, they don't mean that. But you got to get like maybe an oddly specific doormat. But it's not like it's on your house, it's
yeah,
on the floor of your house.
Did you have a sign up at your house, Kyle? I'm starting to wonder.
I told you my mom was a sign lady, and it was kind of embarrassing when we were in but we were in apartments really, so it wasn't. She would just put signs up for everything, anything she was passionate about. She'd make it, order it, put it on her truck, put it on the mailbox, the community mailbox. She was a big note lady.
I think you're onto something.
Community mailbox.
We lived in an apartment, so it was like the big, the big.
Yeah, but I'm saying she would put a sign up on that if it was a cause she was fighting for,
or just
something that said like hang in there.
Yeah, I told you we were trapped in the back, and she started a whole movement.
That's true. I think you are onto something though, Kyle. Real quick, what if you just did like the "Beware of Dog" sign, and then people are going to be afraid to come to your door, the dog situation, because that's like a little more believable, and it's not. And then you're not being a dick either. Could be true.
I don't like the sign thing. Maybe I disagree with the emailer. We're pretty disconnected right now as a society. People are lonelier than ever before. People aren't meeting the way that they traditionally used to meet. And if they don't meet online, it's the same girls that thousands of dudes are just trying to reach out to. So now they feel like they're being rejected. And there's just a lot of stuff going on right now. What's wrong with a guy knocking on the door? And
because it's not going to fix any of that stuff. Some guy trying to sell you something at your door. Like that's not.
Did you ever have
solution.
to sell? Did either of you guys ever have to sell anything door to door?
Yeah, I used to canvass for. I interned for a politician back in the day. I won't say who, but yeah, I had
Trump.
to go asking like, "Hey, have you read independent voters?" It is not. I think it'd be surprising who it would be, but I'm not going to say it. But
Greenspan?
Nope. But I would have to go to independent voters and be like, "Hey, would you consider who you voting for?" and talk to them.
What the hell led you down that path?
Woof, dude.
A passion.
I told you guys I spent a lot of time in DC. I thought I wanted to get into the political game. Glad I did not. Yeah, I used to like do the "Hey, rock, get out and vote" thing, and now I couldn't really care less.
You rocked the vote? God, you got some Danny Egan vibes to you.
Well, it didn't work out well for me. So yeah, I took the LSAT and everything. I thought I was like going to DC and it's going to be a big shot. I don't know,
lobbyist
or whatever, lobbyist. Maybe those guys make a lot of money. Glad I didn't do that.
See it. Suited all the time. I could see it.
Big Senator's assistant.
So
I got pretty close to the finish line with the Cutco thing, but I don't know. I just saw a couple people like selling knives and stuff, kitchen knives, and I was just like, I don't know. Doesn't sound good. I think there was some sort of like money that was coming from me too, and I was like, this doesn't sound right. And I don't know. I couldn't really see myself doing that. But I was like a teenager thinking about like door-to-door knife salesman. It's like I think I could just do something else.
I'm old enough to remember like when they had Tupperware parties, and then when Encyclopedia Britannica sales guy would come by. It was funny, like
crashed the Tupperware party.
No, he came by. It was like my parents called to inquire as like me and my sisters.
Pretty cool.
We're getting older, and then my father was just like, I think they'd leave you like A. It's like you're gonna get hooked on it, like crack.
I need more. Yeah.
Like, Dad, I'm at Aardvark. Are we ordering this thing or what? And it's
awesome.
My father was like, we're not doing that. It's a fucking joke. It's way too expensive for us. It's like, the poor guy would, I think, stop by, follow up. Yeah, it was just a different time. The emailer brings up a really good point. Should we be in a society where no one's ever knocking on anyone's door anymore? Because he's right. Like, has anyone ever answered the door? But see, this is kind of the old Brett Favre thing. Like, that picture had to have worked at some point for him to think that was a good idea ever. So I operate under the premise that of the signs that are on the most destroyed electricity pole in the worst part of town that's like, we'll buy your house for cash. Somebody has to have called that number and been like, will you buy my house for cash right now? Because it can't be a zero success rate or none of it would ever work. So the guy knocking on the door, somebody, like, I get called all the time on something I don't even own anymore. And I'm thinking, like, what kind of terrible, these are not the Glengarry leads. Like, what is this guy operating with to be calling me years and years removed from a transaction because he just found something in some like logbook? Hello, I have this number, I have the contact. Hey, do you want to sell this thing? It's like, I told a guy one time, I was like, I don't even live in the country anymore, which is obviously not true. But he was so confused, he couldn't figure it out because I got sick of the calls all the time. Should we be to the point where no one's ever knocking on the door? I think it would be approved. I think it would get a high approval rating. But I'd say for the guy on the other side hustling, trying to figure out if somebody wants to sell their house, somebody must say yes enough for him to continue to keep doing it.
You know what it feels like? It feels like the cable thing, right? Like plenty of people still use cable, but they're all like in their 50s and 60s, and like it's a dying thing. I'd imagine door-to-door knocking, like that's probably going to be a thing that doesn't happen. Something's going to like in the next 30 years, I'd be surprised if there was as much people like canvassing, going door-to-door selling stuff, because that's just not like what I feel like younger people are into.
Well, there already isn't as much as there was, right? So you're totally right there. Yeah, who's selling vacuums door-to-door now, right? That was a thing.
But I'm not going to tell the door-to-door guy listening right now saying like stop doing it, right? Right?
Yeah, right.
Maybe have a backup plan. I don't know. I'm pro no, don't knock on my door though. Don't. I have dogs. It's a pain in the ass. Got a kid just napping sometimes.
Hey, I'm not pretending. I'm just thinking about that poor encyclopedia guy who came back a second time to have my dad be like, "We're not doing this."
Probably didn't even get to charge mileage on that. That sucks.
Yeah. He thought he was in. He thought he had a couple. I mean, think about it. Your families would order home encyclopedias because there was no internet and be doing book reports, you know? And then he was like, you just go to the library. I'm not paying for that.
Was right.
Yeah. But that was the thing. It was like a lot of houses, the fancy kids, you go over and be like, do you see our catalog?
Our leather-bound books? Yeah.
You know, they'd come over to my place and be like, you have the first one? Like, what happened? Like, my dad changed his mind. He didn't want to do it. Like the Russillos are poor. They only have the A. All right. Let's see. We touched on this last week when Ceruti, I think people listening to Ceruti say that I'm off-putting at first would make people think that it would bother me. It did not. But when we did the confrontation, we did the confrontation recap. Please have more Ryen confrontation stories. I hope I have 0 more confrontation stories, but Ceruti seems to think it's just all in the recipe. This past pod and the golf course stories were great. I now ask myself, what would Ryen do when confronted with people like this? I think we had some follow-ups to the Rivian truck guy, and I also think it's important to point out that I'm not big enough. I'm not at that size of a person where somebody would go, well, I'm not getting out of the car against him, right? There's another level, and I think I know I'm clearly under whatever that size is, where it's just I'm not messing with that person. So that's why the guy he actually never got out of the truck, but why he maybe was willing to if I was like, yeah, get out. Let's do this right before I go to the beach. This will be fun.
Beat your ass and get in the water.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. Probably not an email in there. Never mind. Okay. Do we do a fantasy one? And how about this one? Successful coup at work. God, this one's long.
Save it.
Yeah, we don't have enough time for it on the taping schedule today.
We're under the gun today, just so you guys know.
Yeah. Okay. All right. How to stop unsolicited gym advice. So we had the golf advice last week. Here's the gym advice. 32 from England, 6'4", 190 stones. Just kidding. That would be massive. 190 pounds.
Fucking great. NBA, I don't know why. That was so funny.
NBA comp. Kyle's laughter sometimes on these episodes makes me leave, and I'm just in the best possible mood. I'm like, maybe I am funny. All right. Joakim Noah, Draymond Green. Surprising rebounding stats for my size and good vision to distribute from the high post, but the jump shot comes and goes, and defenders tend to sag off a little by the third quarter. I had a few trials for the youth national team. I had a few trials for the youth national team in England as a teenager. I don't know how that translates to high school level, but I assume the British accent automatically makes me last pick in any pickup game. Likely.
That's a good observation.
Yeah, this guy's good. All right. Not been a regular at the gym for several years, so I asked my gym-going friend to estimate an added 10% squat, 220, deadlift 260, bench 130. Gonna have to work on those bench numbers. All right. Wanted to ask Ryen, the czar of gym-related disputes, for some advice on behalf of my partner. She was at the gym yesterday doing some exercises given to her by her physio when a 60-year-old overweight guy stood right next to her, facing her, saying nothing. She then stopped and looked at him, but all he said was, I'm not waiting for the machine. She carried on doing her exercises, but he didn't move. He then asked, are you doing that exercise for your arms? And she told him that it was for her shoulders. He replied, right. Because if it's for your arms, you need to stand closer to the machine to get the full benefit. Her physio is perfectly happy with her current form, so I don't think she needs advice to some guy who watched Pumping Iron on Netflix once. That guy sounds like he probably watched it more than once. What's the best way for her to shut down unsolicited gym advice, or does she just need to wear a T-shirt that says, "If you don't work here, don't tell me about my form"? Well, it sounds like she ran into a creeper. He was 60, and it's not going to happen that often. I mean, there's definitely going to be guys checking her out if she's attractive, that whole thing, but they'll probably be a little bit more clever about it. And usually the more expensive the gym, the more clever the lurking becomes. So, I don't know. This sounds kind of like a one-off. I thought this was going to be about you getting back to the gym and just tips in general. Being at the gym over the years, you still rarely are going to see at nicer gyms a guy go up to a female completely unsolicited to be like, "Hey, let me help you with your form." Yes, I know women are going to be listening to this saying it happened to me. I'm not saying it happened 0 times, but it's just more often than not, people that go to the gym enough understand that. I mean, you talk about the golf part of it. This is way worse. Yeah. Like the gym advice, like I'll see guys about to destroy themselves doing something wrong, and I still won't say anything for the hesitation of just, this doesn't even make any sense. The only time I've ever done it in the past was just with younger dudes who were skinny, and I'd see myself being clueless in there and not really know what I was doing, potentially hurting myself long term by just being stupid and not what's going on. So that's the only time I'll ever step in, like a younger dude, where I'll be like, "Hey, dude, let me just, walk you through a thing or two here." So look, it seems like such a one-off, guys. I don't really know that it's worth really dissecting.
Yeah, I wouldn't dissect that part, but since that last episode, we were talking about golf and how I'm into golf tips, completely feel the opposite about gym tips, because golf is like this mystery thing. It's like, I'm doing it, and it's not even remotely what it's supposed to look like. And that's like, there's a real like art to it. Not saying that it's not for weightlifting or whatever, but it's like, I don't know. It's just it's a way easier to grasp the concept of weightlifting. So like, I don't know. It's just more offensive for somebody to be like, "You look like you're fucking lost here, pal," than it is at golf, where most people that I'm around are like, "I just can't figure it out." So I just think I feel completely opposite the way I welcome golf tips. I would not be interested in somebody like stopping me in the middle of my thing and be like, hey, let me just tell you, unless I'm actually like, going to hurt myself.
Yeah. Under no circumstance should you be giving anyone advice at the gym, unless like they're on the verge of physically harming other people at the gym. Leave people alone, I think is mostly, I mean, at least in golf, like you're locked into a foursome. Like you have to talk. Like there's going to be small talk if you don't know the people. It'd be weird if you didn't say anything. So there's going to be some interaction. You don't have to interact with anyone at the gym. Like you put the headphones on, get in, get out. If you have a partner, that's great. But like, this isn't like a thing where like, "Hey, I'm going to go find my buddy at the gym today, or I'm going to go correct people." It reminds me of those, I forget, it's the insurance commercial, where they talk about like becoming your parents, and it's like
the general,
that person, not the general. It's like that person has green hair.
That's really good.
Like,
yeah.
Just leave it alone. You don't have to say anything about it. Just leave it alone. Like you don't have to acknowledge it. Like it's fine. But this is that situation. Just because somebody's doing something you don't think is right, like if it's not harming anybody, leave them alone. Don't acknowledge it. It's fine.
Side note, they really have struck gold with those commercials. It's hard to find like a non-stupid good concept of commercials, and I think they've nailed it. Good job by those people.
You could also just, with the earbuds in, once you see, because like a lot of this stuff, it's not solved, but it's just going, you ran into a bad one that day. That guy's got a touch of something. He's going to touch of something, whether he's mad at the world or he's just not maybe processing things. You can remember birthdays, right? I would say, why not like touch your earbud and really loudly be like, "I'm on a call." Just be so obnoxious just to that person.
Yeah.
I'm on a call, right? Like, and they deserve that. They deserve you being absurd and making up something, because the guy standing there, I don't think he would have done that to a guy. I don't think he would have done that to a guy, whether it's his own misogynistic, "I'm just going to be an asshole guy" thing, or it's him being like, "I want to stand closer to this girl," and all these different things. But, I'd strike first, strike hard on everything. It's kind of how I look at it. Just why?
Words to live by.
Yeah. Why even discuss it? Why even email us? Just be like, "Hey, get away from me, fatso." Well, no, I mean, I'm not making fun of fat people, but just whatever, like just really cutting stuff. You want to get weird? All right, let's get weird.
I like the meeting thing in this day and age. Yeah. I like the meeting thing. Who knows when you're in a meeting or not? That's totally better than be like, "What? Sorry." Just like, I'm actually in a meeting because this is the new world. Yeah. This is the new world. Everyone could be in a meeting. Great line.
Then he looks at the phone. He sees a Spotify video of Dua Lipa.
Yeah. It's called multitasking, dude. Figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm on with her. She has a huge new benefit. All right. That'll do it for the show today. Thank you to Oregon. Thank you to Kyle. Thank you to Ceruti. Check out our YouTube page. And please subscribe. Ryen Russillo Podcast, Ringer, Spotify.